Okay, guys, here we go. Chapter 23. I'll read the little bit before it. If you've missed it, go back and check some of the other casts. They're all there. All the information's there about what we've been doing and what we've been listening to. So, yeah. Cool. Let's get on to it. Read a little bit before. Where should I start? Here we go. Vanessa looked at him, offering a nod as she replied, and then walked in his direction. I'm proud of you, Tom. You did well. I can't believe how far you've come already. The Ligero will let me share more with you now that Paul and Alex can vouch for your loyalty. Vanessa said, reaching out and touching his hand, and putting her hand on Tom's shoulder. Something about the way Vanessa was acting didn't... Sorry, I've just lost my place. Oh, there it is. Something about the way Vanessa was acting didn't feel quite right, and Tom was wondering what else he didn't know about. The taller man had said he was under Vanessa's command. Maybe she had asked him to enhance the truth to make it more convincing. Reserving judgment, his faith in Vanessa was shaken by the training drill, and a looming feeling of disbelief. He shook off Vanessa's affection and took a few steps away from her. Okay, sorry, that was terrible reading. I'll read that whole passage again. Something about the way Vanessa was acting didn't quite feel right, and Tom was wondering what else he didn't know about. The taller man had said that he was under Vanessa's command. Maybe she had asked him to enhance the truth, to make it more convincing. You know, because the taller man had told Alex, Tom all about his family and how they had died in front of him. So he's thinking there that maybe Vanessa may have told him to, enhance that truth and maybe bend it a little bit. Reserving his judgment, his faith in Vanessa was shaken by the training drill, and the looming feeling of disbelief. He shook off. That should not be one sentence. Shaken by the training drill. A looming feeling of disbelief lingered. I'm gonna change it right here now. This is why this is the unedited version. So it says edit up in the corner here, guys. Lingered. He shook off Vanessa's affection and took a few steps away from her. Wincing in the pain with each step, Tom pointed at his knee, saying, "This is going to make it hard for me to get back to the summit." Vanessa inspected his swollen knee, then looked at the other two men. "Paul, we'll meet you at the summit in a couple of hours. I have to whip something up to sort this knee out." With that, the shorter man smiled, so the shorter man is Paul, and turned towards the river. "See you in a couple. I'll get Alex to sort out the tent and stuff." Tom's mind went into overdrive, and he watched Vanessa intently, staring at the men making their way across the river. So, what's just happened there is, just to recap, because we're picking up the story after a week, is Vanessa's sort of acting a bit shady, and Tom doesn't buy it. Why this training drill's happened, and he doesn't buy Alex's story completely about his family dying. So just recapping that for you to help you get into it. Once they were out of sight, Vanessa began to relax a little and look back towards Tom. "Did you believe that rubbish?" she said, now calming herself. Paul's all good. He was my teacher's first student. But something isn't right with Alex. Since the day he was introduced to me, I felt something was wrong with him. When you set the first trap on the summit, did you see how Paul dove in my direction, trying to save me from the blast? Alex was only out for himself. He would have let me die. I think he might not be what he seems. When she finished, Tom felt silly for ever doubting her, and his renewed faith in both Vanessa and the way she was, and had renewed faith in both Vanessa and the way she was training him. The way Vanessa visibly relaxed once Alex had left reinforced his own feelings of unease about him and gave him some sense of relief about the situation that had just passed. Something about that story really bugged me, Tom said, offering Vanessa a talking point. Yeah, it's the same story he's been telling for 10 years, and it still hasn't got more believable, she replied, before adding, me and Paul have talked about it hundreds of times. Tom contemplated what Vanessa had just said, while she was starting to manipulate his leg, flinching with each motion of her hand. He tried to force the conversation on, asking, do you think Paul trusts him? Paul doesn't trust anyone. Except me, and maybe you, she said, as she compressed Tom's knee and caused a loud crack. Immediately, Tom felt the pain disappear and an amazing sense of relief wash over him. Vanessa had fixed whatever was wrong with his knee, and now he could move again. So the conclusion of that chapter was Tom had heard the story from Alex, and Vanessa had sort of played the part and pretended that was true tried to pretend that was true for Tom's sake. As soon as Alex left, Vanessa told Tom how she really felt about Alex's story, and she thinks that there's something wrong with it and that maybe he's not a good guy. So there's a little bit of deception there. Maybe they're thinking that he might be on the Equilibra side or whatever. Whoa, there's heaps of people on the chat. Okay. Sorry, that was kind of hard to pick up. I shouldn't stop mid-chapter. I won't stop mid-chapter this time. The walk back to the summit was long and interesting. Though Vanessa had repaired his leg, it was not 100% and limited their travel speed to a trudge and gave them more opportunity to talk about the day and Vanessa's life. Tom had learned that Vanessa had asked Paul to come and help train Tom, and he had refused unless Tom would pass the test. Though Vanessa had debated the validity of the testing Tom, it was eventually led to today's exercise. On the walk, Vanessa had talked about her teacher and how life was growing up and learning to use her abilities. She had mentioned how Paul was almost like a bigger brother, and when her teacher had died, he had taken it very hard. Although Vanessa talked a lot about their teacher's skill in battle and his position of authority in the Ligero, his death remained a mystery to Tom. Once they finally made it to the summit, Tom looked around the now charred clearing in disbelief. You'd make a pretty good demolition expert, came a call from just outside of sight, and Tom turned to see Alex carrying 2 bags full of equipment. Had to go all the way back to town. Everything here was burnt to a crisp, he said, throwing the bags in a pile. Do you know where Paul is? Vanessa asked, ignoring his attempt of humour. He's off training, like always. The boy gave him quite a shock, said Alex, smiling at Tom, which sent a shiver down his spine. Vanessa, who was notably tense again, walked in Alex's direction, getting to within inches of his inches, she smiled and smiled through gritted teeth, saying, "Can you get him then? We'll sort out the tents." Alex didn't hide the fact that that he wasn't pleased with getting bossed around by her, and looked her dead in the ears. "I don't think I can. You best go. Paul hates it when I interrupt his training." "I'll look after the boy." Vanessa looked at Tom, checking for a reaction, and he shrugged back at her, trying not to show any signs of weakness. Remember, we're not sure, guys. I'm just breaking from the story. Remember, we're not sure about Alex, so Tom's getting left with someone who is potentially not a good guy. Alex was hiding the fact. Sheesh, I've lost my place again. Checking her action. Walking back in Tom's direction, she leaned over and whispered, "I'll be back in a minute. You'll be alright." Before dashing down the mountain, Tom tried to look as comfortable as possible and made his way over to Alex. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, hoping he would be sent away to gather firewood or something. "Just chill out. You had a pretty hard day. Maybe you need to absorb some energy or something," Alex replied. Though the thought of absorbing the last of the sunlight seeping through the clearing was appealing, Tom decided he wouldn't be comfortable unless he kept a close eye on Alex. Finding himself with nothing to do, Tom took a place at the side of the fire and began to watch Alex zip about readying the campsite. Before long, Alex turned towards Tom, offering him a topic of conversation. "Do you know the Equilibra are almost the same as the Ligero in every way?" Tom looked at Alex, trying to hide the displeasure of the conversation, and said, "What about the prophecy?" "That seems like a pretty big difference." Alex smiled. "So she's already told you about the prophecy. That's not surprising. But I have a question for you. Do you actually believe that someone has the potential to reset the universe by absorbing all this energy of the unworthy? Seems pretty unlikely to me. It's just an old legend, and yet it's been the foundation of a 1400-year-old war." "So what? You think we should all just become friends? Didn't they kill your family?" said Tom, not hiding his anger as well as he should have. "Boy, you're missing the point entirely," snarled Alex, breathing heavily and trying to calm himself. "If I was there before my family were attacked, I would have gone with the Equilibra, and they would still be alive. They were killed because a side was chosen for me, and I don't even hold the same beliefs as most of the people on that side. I was just found by the Ligero first. Why bother telling me about your family then?" Tom asked, taking stock of what he was hearing. "The point is, keep your abilities hidden is the only way that you can avoid conflict. I told you my story so you could get a better understanding of life at war. You don't want to be part of this fight. The sound of a conversation in the distance stopped Alex mid-sentence, and Tom turned to see Vanessa and Paul walking up the clearing. As Vanessa turned to the campsite, Tom kept his eyes firmly fixed on Alex, waiting to assess how he would react to the others. React around her after the conversation. He didn't hold himself strangely or look nervous, but it was clear he was putting on an act. His voice became louder, his tone changed, and it seemed like every second word was about how great Tom was, and Vanessa wasn't buying it. Watching on, the small group of adults began to discuss their plans for the rest of the weekend. Tom thought about how obvious it was that Vanessa was seeing right through Alex's act. How could he think that she didn't know he wasn't a true believer? And why did he think Tom wouldn't tell Vanessa about what he'd said to him? As the rest of the night flowed, Tom found himself listening to the stories about when Vanessa and Paul were young. From what he could gather, they had spent most of their time going from city to city with their teacher, checking on the Ligero around the country. The conversation about their old teacher spiked Tom's curiosity about the Ligero, and he listened intently. For what seemed to be a hierarchical ranking system within it. Hierarchical means it's kind of like the Queen is the top of our hierarchy, then you'd go our Parliament, and then you'd go, Prime Minister, Parliament, goes down. So that's like a system of order and control. And by the end of the night, he had figured out that the Ligero military style ranking system, and learnt that Vanessa was on a break from her official role. They talked about the leadership in the Ligero, and Tom got the feeling that both Vanessa and Paul thought it wasn't as strong since their teacher's death. Finally, the night seemed to slowly work its way to a close, and Paul announced that he was off to bed. My computer's frozen. No. And began lumbering his way to the second tent. An awkward silence growing between the group caused Alex to quickly follow, and not before giving Tom a not so subtle wink. When both men left, Tom found himself eager to speak about Alex and slid around the fire close to Vanessa. I can't believe it. Vanessa held her hand on his mouth, interrupting him. I know what you're going to say, but not now, Tom. We'll talk about it once we're back, she whispered in his ear. Changing her tone, she said, tell me what you've learned today. Oh no, I'm so terrible at following this today. Shh. Changing her tone, she said, tell me what you've learnt today. Follow. Tom looked at her puzzled before realising she was putting on a show for anyone who might be eavesdropping. Hesitating a little, she nodded, urging Tom to start talking. Feeling like feels like an age ago, but I learned how to use Hydro. I learnt about your old teacher and how the Ligero ranking system works, he said, trying to keep his voice sounding natural. So what can you tell me about my rank? She asked, smiling to Tom through a dull light. You were shared regional commander. You were a shared regional commander, which, by the sounds of it, means you were in command of half of the South Island. I think that makes you one rank lower than your teacher. Am I right? Vanessa chuckled. You really don't miss much. Good stuff, Tom. But let's hit the hay. Their little performance was over, and Tom smiled at Vanessa as she gave him a thumbs up and mouthed, well done, we'll talk soon. Should I go on, guys? It doesn't seem like anybody's listening in there. Oh, yes. Okay, so people are saying go on. So let's go to chapter 25. I won't stop mid-chapter, I'll just read through to the end of 10:30. Tossing and turning his way through the night, Tom thought about the events of the weekend so far. When he had first heard the words training drill come out of Denise's mouth, he was furious. The idea that she would put him through this kind of torture made him question his faith in her. As the events of the day had continued, Tom had found out more about why he was tested. It had become clear that the test was Paul's idea, and then in many ways Paul had insisted it because of his experiences with Alex. When Tom thoughts settled on Alex, his mind moved into overdrive. He knew what the others only suspected. Alex was a fraud. Maybe he's not super dangerous. Not a super dangerous fraud, like he first thought. But I've lost my place again. Sorry, guys. Suspected. But there we go. I'll slide that down. But if given the chance, he would switch to the Equilibra rather than fight with the others. Tom tried to reason with himself and figured out why Alex would try to talk to him. Try to figure out why Alex would try to talk to him about his lack of faith in the religious beliefs of the Ligero. Coming to the conclusion that if Tom had decided to take the option, take his opinions on board, perhaps Alex would gain the courage to leave the Ligero. The idea was ludicrous. Tom had had heard very little about the prophesied Messiah, and he wasn't exactly sure if he believed it. The fact that Vanessa did was enough for now, and the idea that one day Tom wouldn't have to hide who he was an added bonus. As the first streams of light shot through the tent's thin exterior, Tom realized sleep had escaped him, and he would have to battle the day without the valuable rest. Slowly slipping out of his sleeping bag, Tom crawled to the entrance of the tent, trying not to wake Vanessa. As he battled with the canvas door, pushed his head through to the outside world, his nose and ear instantly froze, and it felt like every breath was drinking ice cold water. Reaching back and grabbing his jacket and boots before crawling out into the snow, he could see the silhouette of a man absorbing the sun. Tom hobbled his way. Shouldn't be capital there. Let's just fix that. Tom hobbled his way over to the man and now recognized Paul. While throwing on the last of his clothes, instead of engaging in conversation, Tom focused on gaining as much energy as possible for the day, and for the day was bound to be draining. Raising his hands in the air, he began the process of absorbing energy from the sun. The feeling of the energy trickling into his body was welcome, and Tom realized how much spiritual energy he had used yesterday. The minutes quickly passed, and Tom was starting to become satisfied when all of a sudden he noticed a static hum floating around his ears. Staying in the moment and trying to focus on absorbing energy, Tom waved his hand at the sound, trying to swat it away. Meeting something with a sharp spike of pain ran up his arm, and Tom leapt back with shock. Quickly spinning around, his eyes settled on Paul. with a small amount of energy and sparking in the tip of his finger. "You need to be more aware, boy," said Paul, stopping the spark at the end of his finger. Tom looked at the back of his hand where it had connected, and Paul seeing a now pulsing red welt. A welt is like a pussy, scarry thing. "I thought it was a fly or something," he said, to defend his action. "You have the same weakness as Ven. She is always thinking the best of situations. My advice, boy, is if it sounds funny, check it out properly and be prepared for the worst. The only way you'll survive as a Ligero. It's the only way you'll survive as a Ligero. I know something that looks and sounds fun. I know something that looks and sounds funny that you've done nothing about," replied Tom, smiling a cheeky smile. I have orders in regards to him, and I will wait till the time is right," said Paul, as he turned and began to walk away. "Waiting?" Tom yelled, surprised. "Wait?" Tom yelled, surprised. "Sorry, guys, I'm struggling here," Paul said, as he turned and began to walk away. "Wait!" Tom yelled, surprised. Paul knew he was talking about Alex. I know stuff about him," he added in one last attempt to halt Paul's escape. With that, Paul slowed and turned to face Tom. "I know a lot about Alex, but I'm interested in what you think you know I don't," said Paul, his dark blue eyes settling on Tom as if he looked right through him. "When Vanessa was off getting you, Alex talked to me about the prophecy. He doesn't believe in it. In fact, he said if he was given the choice, he would have switched sides rather than fight in the name of the Messiah. He has no faith in it." Paul didn't look shocked or even worried. Instead, he just smiled. "Interesting that he has chosen to talk to you about this. Doesn't it make you wonder why he would risk talking to you when you were so close with Vanessa?" Tom nodded. "Yeah, it kind of kept me up half the night. Figured he must be scared to go out alone and was hoping that I would leave the Ligero with him." Paul nodded his head as Tom spoke and seemed to pause to contemplate the situation for a while before adding to the conversation again. "I'm going to assume you haven't figured out why Alex was sent to this tiny little island in the middle of nowhere." Tom didn't have any idea why this was important and shook his head, urging Paul on. "It is said the Messiah will rise from the bottom of the world. You know what that means, don't you, Tom?" Pausing to think about the statement, Tom eventually replied, "We are one of the most southern countries in the world. Does that mean the Messiah could..." Paul held his hand quickly silencing Tom as he rustling sound grew from the tents behind him. Still paused in mid-sentence, he swung around to face the tents and waited for someone to emerge. Vanessa scurried out of the tent, frantically scanning the area before locating Tom and composing herself. "What are you two up to?" She smiled and looked at Tom. Paul looked back at her, raised one eyebrow as he was trying to communicate something, and said, "We were going to go off and train. I'm thinking about teaching the boy the third form." Third form of absorbing spiritual energy. There is only 3. If Tom learns the third form, he'd be crazy powerful so quickly. I think it might be a little early for that. I'll teach him once we get home, Vanessa replied, looking shocked at Paul's statement. Paul's eyes shifted to the tents and then back to Vanessa. The boy learnt something from our friend yesterday. He needs to know everything. Vanessa looked a little put out, but moved herself closer to Tom, whispering in his ears, I want you to know I believe in you, Tom. I know it with every ounce of my body. Okay, Tom. We'll walk and talk, said Paul, adding, Vin, can you and Al sort brekkie? Just check that people are still interested. There's a few people on. What do we think? Paul's going to tell Tom? Does anybody know what they think Paul's going to tell Tom? I'll check back in a second. As he started to walk away from Vanessa, Tom waved goodbye to Vanessa and scurried after Paul, thinking about how he had changed topics so sharply once she had emerged from the tent. Quickly catching up with Paul, he jumped down the large bouldery section of the mountain, landing next to him and asking, So why are you teaching me the third form? Vanessa could train me. Paul looked at Tom out of the corner of his eyes and replied, I'm not teaching you the third form. You're a long way off being ready for that. We are talking about the prophecy. Vin knows, but I want to keep Alex out of the loop if he was listening. So they were worried about Alex overhearing, and they want to keep Alex out of the loop. Any replies to my question? No one's replied to my question. Anybody got a prediction? Like I was saying before, the Messiah is to come from the bottom of the world. Alex was sent here because he doesn't have faith in our beliefs. The masters of the Ligero believed that if he was to encounter the Messiah, he would change his points of view. That is why he would leave the that way he wouldn't leave to be equilibrium and make our situation even worse. Paul stopped and slowly turned to Tom, saying, Race you to the U. We'll talk more there. Before taking off in a flash, Tom barreled after him, jumping over huge rocks and smashing his way through bushes, using his spiritual energy to boost his speed, slowing down once he hit the riverbank. Tom began to think about what Paul had said and prepared questions for when they next talked. Eventually, he saw Paul in the distance. Ordered the last of his thoughts before approaching him. Alex tried to convince me that the idea of the Messiah was silly. Then you say the Messiah will come from New Zealand. This book's set in a fictional version of New Zealand, by the way, guys. And that he had reasons for trying to convince me otherwise. Like it's more important that I believe in the Messiah. So, what's the deal? Why is it important that I believe? Tom finished blurting out his questions, and Paul stood silently, assessing Tom. At the current rate, you will be the most powerful Ligero ever in a matter of years. Who do you think could be the Messiah? Said Paul, Tom's heart instantly went to ice. Cold as he ice cold as he tried to reject the statement. I can't be. I don't want to be. I just don't know. Tom said, stumbling over his words. Paul raised his hands, trying to calm Tom down, and began to speak. I know this is a shock, and I know what you're thinking. The idea of having the fate of the world on your shoulders is too much. But you're going to change it. Your mind will expand. Everyone's does. Tom stumbled backwards and turned towards the mountain as panic washed over him. I need to see Vanessa. I'm not what you think I am, he yelled, before charging his legs and making for the mountains. Like a flash, Paul was in front of him and slapped him to the ground. Tom, listen! Paul yelled as he jumped on top of him, holding him down, and Tom squirmed with pain. Yelling at Tom, Paul tried to gain his attention, but Tom was fighting back, refusing to let Paul speak. All he could think about was getting back to Vanessa and avoiding the conversation. Paul's grip became tighter and tighter as his face got closer and closer to Tom. Struggling against the much stronger man, Tom eventually realized it was listen or be forced to listen, and stopped. Did anybody get their predictions right? No one even made a prediction. Listen or be forced to listen, and stopped. Paul, only inches from Tom's face, loosened his grip a little and calmly spoke. You're not the Messiah yet, but it takes years before we will truly know. You see, only the Ligero using the third form. Only the Ligero use the third form of absorbing energy. The first two are passive. The third one, you forcibly take the energy from nature or animals. When you start taking energy from something, you end up getting other things as well. Emotions, feelings, thoughts, memories. Eventually, these things become part of who you are. They change you. They help you to grow. After a few years of using the third form, you might start to believe and fulfill your potential. Tom breathed heavily and tried to take it all in. I don't want to change. I'm happy just being me. I'm not trying to save the Ligero or rid the world of evil. I just want to live, said Tom, calming himself. You have much to learn. Living is impossible with the Equilibro around, said Paul, with a dull smile. Surviving is all we can do. While we wait for the Messiah, one day you will see what they have done to us, and you will accept your destiny, Paul said, looking down visibly disappointed at what Tom was saying. Tom gathered himself and got back to his feet, and Paul began to walk away and yelled. I still want to learn the third form. I just don't think you have the right guy. I don't see myself magically changing into the Messiah over the next couple of years. Paul turned, faced him. I'm pleased you haven't ruled out using the third form. You can learn so much about the world if you're just willing to take the knowledge out there. I'll meet you back at the top. Now you know. I'll give you some space to think about the future. Tom's mind went into overdrive as he watched Paul disappear. At first, the idea of the Messiah seemed like a giant relief. Now, the idea was yet another thing weighing him down. Cool. Chapter 26. Hope you guys got something out of that. I think we're going to call it there.